This game is fun and all, but I just wish he had his driver's license. Oh. Oh my god. Alright, now imagine with me a scenario. You're a kid in the 90s and you have a Sega Game Gear. Anyways, everyone else is still rocking with that old tattered Game Boy. They don't have your fully colored backlit screen, your ergonomic shape, or your exclusive Sega titles. Oh, and those titles, let me tell ya. Sure, there may not be as many as there were for the Game Boy, but there's still pretty impressive titles in here. I mean, Sonic Triple Trouble, Shining Force 2, not to mention all the back ports of Genesis games. And of these games is a small little kart racer that would be the start of many racing games to come, Sonic Drift. Released exclusively in Japan in March of 1994, Sonic Drift was the very first Sonic racing game ever made. And while from first impressions this might seem like Sega just copying Mario Kart's homework, this game is nothing like Mario Kart. Because this game is bad. But in all seriousness, Sonic Drift actually beat Mario Kart to the punch when it came to a handheld entry. It'd be 7 years after this game that we'd finally get Super Mario Kart Advance. So, if you wanted some fun kart-like racer on the go, this would be one of the very few options you had back then. Ironically, this game uses the exact same engine as another classic Sega racing game, Outrun, and putting these two side by side, you can definitely see the similarities. However, this is both a blessing and a curse. On one hand, it's built off of a game that is already really fun to play, but the issue is that Outrun was a game made for endurance. The only race was against whether or not you could make it to the next checkpoint in time, and because of this, Sonic Drift often feels quite barren compared to its kart racing counterparts over at Nintendo. So let's go back and break down exactly how this game works. In Sonic Drift, there are only 3 buttons you really need to use in this game. You have an acceleration button, a brake button, and a special button. Unlike Mario Kart, Sonic Drift doesn't feature any items that you can use. Instead, the game utilizes rings that are placed on the track as well as different objects on the field. The 3 main things you can interact with in stages are the red item box, which causes you to have a speed increase, the blue item box, which gives you invincibility, and the yellow spring, which shoots you up into the air and sort of auto-corrects you back to the center of the track. The overall game plan for this game is so drastically different compared to other racers, as I'd argue the most important aspect of this game is just staying on the road itself. When you first start out, it's extremely easy to veer drastically off course, which is to be expected of racing games of the time. Again, just look over at what Mario Kart was doing and its steep learning curve with its drifting. It's definitely a struggle to get used to at first. I assumed I had to brake during tight corners, but if you hold the brake button while accelerating, it actually causes you to spin out completely. So, the strategy I finally landed on was tapping the brake button in a rhythm whenever I got to a corner. This allowed me to turn corners almost every time. So, it's safe to say that with those fundamentals in mind, this game is pretty straightforward. As long as you don't veer off the map or crash into anything, you're pretty much guaranteed the win. However, the game does have a tiny bit of variation in how you can play it. The game has a roster of only 4 characters, which isn't a lot, but each character controls slightly differently, and they each get their own unique abilities which you can use 2 rings to activate. Sonic is of course the speed character. Turning corners can be a bit challenging with him, but his ability allows him to activate a speed boost whenever he wants, which is really good for straight lines. Tails feels a lot more well-rounded, and his ability is essentially just the yellow spring, sending him up in the air, positioning him back in the center of the road. Amy is really good when it comes to turning corners, and her ability is probably the most interesting, as it places hearts on the map that then invert the other player's controls. And finally, we have Eggman, who is also an all-rounder, and his special ability is placing mines on the map that people can then bump into and spin out. So while the game might be very limited in terms of its track design and overall gameplay, there are small seeds of what could be a very interesting and unique racing game here. But it's in those stages where I feel like this game's uniqueness really starts to shine. The game starts with 3 options of Grand Prix, and in each Grand Prix you play through 6 different stages from the first Sonic the Hedgehog game. Of course you have stuff like Green Hill, but seeing stages like Marble Garden Zone, a personal favorite of mine, as a racetrack is so cool. I think there's something really endearing seeing all these stages turned into tracks. It's definitely not the most in-depth thing ever, but I still think it's really, really cool. All in all, Sonic Drift is unfortunately a pretty boring racing game. Sure, it's mechanically sound, and it feels like a perfect type of game to play on a handheld like a Game Gear, but the gameplay is insanely boring once you figure out how to play it effectively. The other NPCs barely interact with you, and it basically just becomes a glorified turning simulator. But the game is quite short, so I feel like it doesn't overstay its welcome, and who knows, maybe you'll find some enjoyment out of this that I didn't. In terms of the game's critical reception, the game released to pretty mediocre reviews from critics and the general public, which then makes it all the more surprising that not only did this game receive a sequel a while later, but that this version of the game was the one that finally made its way to the US. Sonic Drift 2 is an improvement in every single aspect to the original game, to the point where I'm genuinely so impressed with what they managed to achieve. Granted, that may be due to how bad the first game was, but I honestly believe that Drift 2 is a pretty good kart racer. Overall, the gameplay is the same, but these new additions that they added make it feel a lot more complete and fun. Since Drift 2 released after Sonic 3 as well as Sonic the Fighters, Drift 2 adds a bunch of characters from multiple different games. We got Knuckles, Metal Sonic, and Fang the Sniper. The game has also spiced itself up in the gameplay department, with the item boxes now working as they would in Mario Kart. If you get a colored item box on the screen, you then get to hold on to that item. So if I hit, for example, a red box, I will then be able to use the red speed boost whenever I want it. Track design is something that has also drastically improved. Not only do we now get tracks based on more stages from other Sonic games, but we also get these really interesting, unique stages with these fascinating gimmicks, like the stormy forest that flashes lightning sometimes as you drive through, or the caves with rumbling debris that you have to avoid. I honestly would kinda love to see these come back as future tracks in Sonic Crossworlds. I feel like they're super unique when it comes to Sonic stages. Another interesting stage gimmick is that some of the stages are now one big race to the finish. I thought this was not only super unique and really embraced the outrun roots of the game, but it's also really interesting in terms of its track layout, and it just adds so much complexity to the game. The long courses were honestly my favorite thing this time around. I just love the atmosphere of some of these, the tension that it builds near the end of the race is just so thrilling. They also managed to fix the issue of the game being, how straight can I drive, by adding obstacles to the map, as well as making the NPCs actually use their abilities. This game can be extremely unforgiving at times, and while I always manage to win at the end, I actually never manage to win every race consistently. So there you have it. Those were the first 2 Sonic racing games ever created. I actually found myself surprised with just how much fun I had with Drift 2 specifically, and I definitely recommend it if you have any sort of Sonic collection that has it in there. To me, what makes these games stand out amongst the other kart races of the time is their willingness to experiment, especially in that second game. They take a lot of risks, especially with the stage elements, and it makes for a decently memorable and, most importantly, fun experience. However, it's not without its flaws, and in all honesty, it doesn't even compare to some of the weaker Mario Kart games, but for what it's worth, a Game Gear title released in the mid-90s, this is a great game to have. Thank you all for watching till the end of the video. If you enjoyed and think I deserve it, a like and subscribing goes a long way. I also have a Patreon as well as membership options available if you wish to support me for any future projects. With all that chilling out of the way, I hope you have a wonderful day, and I'll see you next time.